former U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine, Ambassador Kurt Volker. Mr. Volker, when you read this situation right now, what's going on? Because there's some that say Mr. Putin is really playing Mr. Biden, and there are others that say maybe Mr. Biden is trying to utilize this tension to his own benefit since his polling numbers are so low. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know if it's a wag the dog kind of situation, but how do you read it?
Well, I don't think that the administration's handling of this thus far has helped President Biden in any way. So I would probably put that one aside. And I'd look at what the Russians are actually doing and saying. The Russians have put over 100,000 military forces and their equipment in the field all around Ukraine and in some cases in Ukraine, in Crimea and the east. They've moved forces into Belarus now as well and announced that there will be a joint Russian-Belarusian military exercise on February 9th. They're also moving naval ships from the Baltic Sea around through the Med and into the Black Sea. These are naval landing ships that Russia's putting there as well. So all of this is combined with demands that Russia has made of the United States and of NATO to never enlarge NATO again, commit that Ukraine can never become a member of NATO, pull back military forces in Central and Eastern Europe and NATO allies like Poland or the Baltic states, and recognize that Russia has a sphere of influence around itself where countries that are joining Russia, parts of the former Soviet Union, don't really have their own sovereignty or independence. That's something that clearly we can't agree to, but Russia has now put out this possibility of really launching a major armed conflict if it doesn't get what it wants.
And speaking of the NATO countries, as you just mentioned, Ukraine is not a NATO country. So when we heard yesterday about the 8,500 troops here in the U.S. who have been put on high alert, where would those troops go? They would just go to assist in other NATO countries surrounding Ukraine?
Exactly. That they are there to provide a statement of reassurance and to deter any potential attacks against NATO members who feel very vulnerable being right there next to Russia, much smaller military forces than Russia has. So this is a measure of reassurance for them and a signal to Russia that we will protect our allies. Unfortunately, Ukraine does not benefit from that. It actually highlights the difference that Ukraine is not a NATO member. It's not going to get U.S. troops or NATO troops to fight alongside them. So what we're doing instead is providing as much equipment and training for the Ukrainians as we can, but they're going to have to defend themselves.
I want to ask you how we should read the meeting of Putin with some of America's allies in what's called a Normandy-style conversation between Russia, Ukraine, France, and Germany, the U.S. not involved, and I believe they did that back in 2014, and in 2014, Crimea was annexed. So, exactly. Yeah, how should we read that?
Yes, that's exactly right. So the French and Germans have launched this diplomatic process involving those four countries. The Russians have used this to deny that they are actually doing anything and blame the Ukrainians, and they've done it consistently. So the French and Germans like having a diplomatic lead. The Russians like having the U.S. not there so that no one is actually standing up for the Ukrainians in those discussions. In this case, I think it is Russia, again, using this as a kind of a smokescreen, pretending to play at diplomacy while building up its military forces. I think they need about 2 more weeks to be fully prepared, and I think they're just trying to play out the clock.
Wow.
You know, even Ukraine's foreign ministry office calling out the Biden administration, saying, quote, you know, there are 129 diplomatic missions in Ukraine. Of these, only 4 have declared the departure of the family members of personnel, U.S., UK, Australia, and Germany. The rest have not expressed their intention to follow such premature steps. He goes on to say that it's extremely important to avoid activity that could be used in the information space to increase tensions in society and destabilize the economic and financial security of Ukraine. So a couple issues there. One, you know, we've heard talk of the U.S. People who are still in Ukraine and trying to get them out of that country, U.S. citizens, I should say. Do you foresee a similar situation as to what we saw in Afghanistan, although it's an entirely different what's happening in Ukraine. But that, of course, makes us think of the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. And then, the information space, when it comes to that, we hear repeatedly about Russia, using the internet and things like that. Do you think cyber attacks? Do you foresee that increasing?
Well, there already have been cyber attacks from Russia against Ukraine. They went after several government ministries, took over their websites, posted threatening messages. So that's already been done. And yes, I think that will increase. As you mentioned, the catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan, just leaving people behind, the chaos that we saw at the airport, that obviously is weighing on the administration. So that's why I think they prematurely have gone in for announcing the withdrawal of dependents, voluntary departure of diplomats there. They don't want it to be called flat-footed again. But as you said, the situation in Ukraine is vastly different than the situation in Afghanistan. There is no Taliban waiting to take over the whole country. There is Russia that is threatening to invade. Ukraine will fight to defend itself, and it'll probably not be affecting the capital or the entire country, but portions in the south and east and somewhere perhaps in the north as well.
All right.
Very different scenario.
Right. Well, Ambassador Volker, thank you very much for joining us with your expertise. We appreciate it.
Thank you.